SoulCalibur 6, a game that most of us weren't sure would ever exist. But as time went on, we learned that the legend indeed will never die. But it's been 4 years since the latest installment was released, so it's time for us to start asking whether or not we can expect to see a SoulCalibur 7 one of these days. With Bandai Namco's Tekken 8 on the horizon, I would not expect it anytime soon. But after Tekken's had its turn of the marketing, who knows what else the devs at Project Soul and Bandai Namco might have in store for us. As a longtime fan of the series, if I'm being honest, I'll be going into this one optimistically and make my case as to why we can expect a SoulCalibur 7. So my objective with this video is to have you leaving here a little bit more optimistic about SoulCalibur 7. So let's start in the most obvious place. Sales, sales, sales. Keep in mind, the SoulCalibur series, even in its heyday, was always relatively niche, so it's never been the biggest seller. But more often than not, it does well enough to turn a profit and justify a new installment. So let's take a quick look and see how SoulCalibur 6 stacks up against its predecessors. The good news is it places itself towards the front of the pack. SoulCalibur 6, as of summer 2021, has sold over 2 million copies, placing it third behind SoulCalibur 2 and SoulCalibur 4. Placing third out of sixth really isn't too bad, and those 2 million copies included some deluxe versions that the sickos like myself paid extra for, as well as 2 seasons of DLC, and we'll get more into that in a minute. But when you consider things like deluxe editions and 2 seasons of DLC, selling 2 million copies in 2022 is certainly different than selling 2 million copies back in the SoulCalibur 2 and 4 days. So needless to say, the Soul series still burns brightly in the hearts of its fans. So next I want to move on into the DLC aspect of this game. We touched a little bit on it just before, but now let's flesh it out. As is the standard in fighting games these days, if you don't make it through at least 1 season of DLC or a Fighter's Pass, you might as well be considered a flop. Luckily for SoulCalibur 6, the series sales justify not just 1, but 2 seasons of DLC. A good sign that the bigwigs at Bandai Namco see a value in the IP. Additionally, the DLC included not only fan-favorite characters, but a new guest character as well. Not just additions to the character customizer, but additions to the plot and timeline as well. Seeing the devs not just settle for making new fighters, but also flesh out the other areas and aspects of the game, I think is a good sign. In fact, it would appear to me that the DLC additions may have had more of a budget than the base game, which will seamlessly lead me into my next point. The game's budget. So I dug as far and wide through cyberspace as I could to find some concrete evidence of what exactly this game's budget was, but it came up empty. Needless to say, when we compare it to its most recent predecessor, SoulCalibur 5, we can see that SoulCalibur 6 was a game clearly made with a fraction of the budget that SoulCalibur 5 was. This can be evidenced by SoulCalibur 6's lack of 3D rendered cutscenes that we saw present in 5. We saw a lot of reused voice lines and other assets in SoulCalibur 6. Meanwhile, SoulCalibur 5 had a cast of almost entirely new characters, and also had a load more of available items in the customizer. Even though I believe the customizer itself in 6 is superior, the variety and availability of armors in SoulCalibur 5 is just far superior, there's just no question. So even when just comparing it to SoulCalibur 5, we can see that SoulCalibur 6 certainly operated under a smaller and tighter budget. And the good news there is that it sold better than SoulCalibur 5. So a tighter, smaller budget and more sales and revenue spells a big victory for the SoulCalibur series and for the bean counters at Bandai Namco as well. The last point I will bring up probably doesn't carry as much weight as the others, but here it goes. Without getting too much into the details, the story in SoulCalibur 6 left us at a cliffhanger. Now, this is all conjecture combined with a little bit of speculation, but hear me out. By Season 2, the devs had to have had a pretty good idea of where this project was going. If Bandai Namco had given any indication that this was the end, or that it might be the end of SoulCalibur, I'd like to think they would have picked a more rounded out ending, but they didn't. Which to me, in all my optimistic hope, would like to think that that means they have a feeling they'll be back for another hurrah. A 7th hurrah. SoulCalibur is a very special series, at least to me. There's truly nothing quite like it. A 3D weapons fighter with an amazing cast and some of the best characters and music that you can ask for. My soul still burns. But does yours? You let me know in the comments below, because that's just gonna about do it for us here on today's video. I hope you are all clinging to hope for SoulCalibur 7 like I am, because the day it drops, I'll be there, day number 1. Anyway, with all that said, you ladies and gentlemen be good out there, be good to yourselves and each other, and I will see all of you beautiful sickos and normies next time.